Me and John talked a little bit beforehand, and I asked him if he wanted to read. And at the time, he said he didn't want to read, but then he's done got wrangled into a reading. So I was going to joke about how he's going to read to us for 30 minutes, but I promise to God he's not going to do that. So don't tune out. But John's going to give us a little short reading of his new novel, After the Lights Go Out.
Wait, you mean I'm not going to do 30?
If you do 30, I'm tuning out and I'm going the hell home.
Damn. Right. I mean, I had a lot picked out, but all right. Okay. So I guess I'll give a little bit of context because it's not from the beginning. So After the Lights Go Out is about a biracial Black mixed martial arts fighter who's on the tail end of his career. And he's also losing his battle with CTE, or pugilistic dementia. He's going through all this while he's trying to care for his white father, who's got Alzheimer's disease. And as he's in the throes of this Alzheimer's, he's starting to reveal some aspects of his personality that make it crystal clear to Xavier as to why his Black mother left the family when he was really young. So he's got a lot going on. This piece that I'm going to read is from a scene where he's just come to the gym where his cousin, who is a former professional boxer and now his trainer and manager, he runs this gym, and Xavier has shown up to kind of reveal to him what he's been going through. But while he's there, he jumps at the opportunity for a sparring session because he's hoping that any day now he's going to get a call to come back to the big show. So this is him right after he's leaving the office, getting ready to step into the cage for a match. Xavier hurried out of the office toward the locker room. He emerged clutching his shin guards and boxing helmet in his gloved hands. Loki snapped playfully at the chin strap hanging loose at Xavier's side. Loki's his dog. He approached the small training cage in the far corner of the gym. Already inside, Lawrence danced around the cage, shadow boxing with rapid uppercuts and retreating jabs, showing improving for the young fighters who hovered on the outside of the fence. His practice punches sliced through the air and snapped at the end. Xavier and Lawrence shared the same weight class, but their physiques were a class apart. Lawrence stood a head shorter, his skin pulled tight across his musculature with all the look of constant training and a disciplined diet. The constellations of acne on his back and chest told an entirely different story. Lawrence smirked when he saw Xavier with his gear. Man, you best tell Shot I'm trying to get some real rounds. Ain't trying to play tag with no senior citizen. Let me ask you something, Larry, Xavier said. When the cops pull you over, do you drop the wannabe act and talk like the rest of the white suburbanites from the main line? Or do you double down on the cultural appropriation? Oh, wait, that's right. You white boys don't get pulled over, do you? Even with those dumbass cornrows on your head. The boys in Lawrence's corner brought closed fists to their mouths and let out a collective, drawn out, damn. Lawrence waved them off, indignant. So if I'm supposed to act white, that means I should talk like you, right? Because when it comes to me and you, everyone knows I'm the blackest one here. Is that right? That's right. And my name is Lawrence, not Larry. But I guess you know all about getting called by the wrong name, huh, Tom? The boys outside the cage oohed, egging on the confrontation, spoiling to see the two throw hands. Others training on the bag stopped their drills and made their way cage side. Xavier clenched his jaw while he wrapped his hands. He once thought he'd left the Lawrences of his life back in high school. The white boys who filled the trunks of their Honda Civic hatchbacks with enormous speaker boxes, bass lines rattling the windows so hard they had to have them resealed, who strutted the halls, their walk and dress an unflattering imitation of whatever rapper they idolized that week, putting on a modern-day minstrel show, who told Xavier how, as a mixed kid who listened to white music, who talked all proper because his black mother taught college English and would not tolerate slang in her home, who had a white father whose hair didn't kink as tight as the other black kids, but was still so exotic and touchable, who wasn't naturally athletic at basketball, football, or track like he was supposed to be, who seemed to only date white girls whose skin, they pointed out, wasn't much darker than theirs when they returned from their summer vacation at their parents' beach home, whose dick was seen as small, all things considered, during showers in gym class, that they were blacker than he was. It had been hurtful enough to hear them from some of his black peers. To hear the same from the Lawrences in his world had been maddening. Xavier hadn't been a fighter then, far from it. A scrawny kid, he'd found no place in group sports. Obsessed with martial arts since his first brush with Saturday morning kung fu theater as a toddler, he begged until his parents signed him up for Taekwondo at the YMCA in the 9th grade. The art granted him no protection from the bullying, no boost in self-confidence. Instead, he found further scorn and derision as kids followed him down the school hallways, taunting him with key eyes before knocking his books out of his hands. Xavier wasn't a fighter then, but he was a fighter now. No, maybe stop there.
Yeah, no, that's a great scene. And what happens right after that scene is we get to watch for the first time in the novel, Xavier just goes wild, and you see the potential he has in the ring. It's kind of this uninhibited moment that's scary for both the reader and for Xavier. Because I think he does something in that moment that he didn't even really know he was capable of.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about Xavier first, because you've got this really interesting character, who's kind of this old, wore-out, grizzled MMA fighter. But what makes him really interesting is that he's battling this condition. Talk a little bit about that and kind of where that character came from, as well as any kind of maybe research you had to do into that to kind of figure out how to write a character like that.
Yeah, the research was from experience, and some of the experience was the research. Before I was fortunate enough to start writing books and get to write another one, I was a physical therapist for 10 years. I spent a lot of time in sports medicine around athletes, but I also spent some time in the home care setting where I worked with patients with dementia or after a traumatic brain injury, things like that. My wife actually still works in the skilled nursing setting, so more with the Alzheimer's and dementia. She's an occupational therapist. So I've been kind of immersed in that world. A lot of the terminology in here is a second language for me, because it was my profession. Likewise, probably, I was a martial arts kid. I took Taekwondo all through high school, took a break in college because I discovered beer. Didn't really got away from anything, any kind of athletic endeavor. And I wasn't really much of an athlete, but martial arts was something I took to. I rediscovered it in my 30s, kind of right after mixed martial arts had started to go more mainstream. It had been around since the early 90s, and I was a fan then, but it really started to become something people were watching and talking about. And I got involved in it mostly just to try and get back in shape. But then it got in my blood, and I fell into it hardcore to the point where I fought as an amateur in kickboxing a few times, and then even did once in the cage. But kind of like when I grew up, like whatever sport I was playing, like I also got obsessed with that sport with the professionals. So like when I was playing Pee Wee football, I watched professional football all the time. So once I got immersed in fighting, I was watching fighting all the time. But I was also reading about it and learning about not just the sport itself, but like kind of what the athletes go through. And nobody likes to talk about head trauma in sports, right? Like nobody wants to think about that. We all kind of ooh and ah when that open field hit happens, when a wide receiver's got his back turned and up in the air, and we look for the big knockout in boxing and in MMA. But after that's done, we get to turn the TV off, and we don't really think about the sacrifices that these men and women are putting in, pretty much for our entertainment and their livelihood. So I think just having been in that world for a long time, and I still train in jiu-jitsu. I don't get hit in the head anymore because shit, who wants to after this kind of thing? But I felt like I wanted to create a character that spoke to some of the things that they go through, but I also thought it was the sport of MMA and the condition of CTE was a bridge into talking about other things, which I did in this book, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that one gorgeous chapter in there where you have these chapters where you break into Xavier's head, and they're all written in second person.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those chapters is all about how much it's his psyche telling him how it is human nature to want to witness and participate in these acts of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things you just said is really right. And I mean, we see it with professional football. There were people that complained when targeting became a major thing in that sport, and it was because they enjoyed watching it.
Right.
You see somebody kick somebody in an MMA fight and break his leg, and the next day that's on Facebook and everybody's watching that video over and over. And so I think you took a really interesting kind of approach to writing about athletes in these really physical contexts. But like you said, it's also a bridge, and the bridge is largely that it gets us to Xavier's father.
Mm-hmm.
And Xavier's father, Sam, is in an assisted living facility, battling with Alzheimer's. And as someone who lost, my grandmother died of Alzheimer's.
Sorry.
And I can, although it was a long time ago, but it was she was the best friend I ever had. And I can remember, everything the way that assisted living facility was and what it was like to walk through there. And I think you capture it perfectly. There's that one moment where Xavier walks into the assisted living facility and he's going to visit his father, but there's an old woman standing there and she takes his hand and he stands there and talk and kind of engages with her for a moment. And that's very much, what those places are like. That's the reality of that place. So talk a little bit about bridging to that gap, to writing about a character with Alzheimer's, writing about a place like that assisted living facility, and just kind of how you went about that.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of motivations behind that. I think one, I think when I first came up with the idea of writing about MMA, I didn't want it to just be, and I don't want to say just because I don't want to. It's not taking a shot at any other sports books, but I didn't want it to be something we'd all read before, right? As a fan of sports fiction, and so in thinking about that, it came to me that guys that are suffering with, men and women that are suffering with CTE are typically much younger. When I was a PT and I was working at a particular hospital, there was a spinal cord injury unit, and the average age of the patients there was like 22. It's because we engage in some crazy shit when we're younger, and it's so this idea that you as a young person you could have these symptoms that we typically silo for older folks. To me was just an interesting juxtaposition, and that's sort of how that story came together. Putting it in the nursing home, man, there are some unsung heroes working in nursing homes, and I don't talk. I mean, we throw around hero kind of lightly. Man, some of those people are just downright heroic, not only in the way that they care for some of the most vulnerable people in our population, but the shit that they take to do so. And again, it's just not something we talk about. And the some of the stuff that Sam ends up saying to some of the people that work there, and I mean, regrettably, a lot of that's pulled from real life. Like I didn't have to get too creative with that. It was there were plenty of stories to draw on. So I really wanted to, for lack of a better term, it was sort of a love song to the folks that I've worked with, that my wife works with every day, that endure some pretty rough stuff in order to take care of people.
Yeah. I remember when my grandmother died, I started working on these essays. And at the time I did a whole lot of research on kind of, that whole occupation. And I can't remember the statistics. This is, more than a decade ago. But at the time, it was almost 100% were women. But the real staggering statistic was that at that time, it was something like 80% of people working in that field were Black women.
Exactly.
And and so that's what we really get in this novel. I always hate asking about race because it's an expected question, and it's often an expected question when a writer's not even necessarily deliberately writing about race.
Right.
I think about somebody like Lisa Cross Smith. I don't know that Lisa Cross Smith is deliberately writing about race. She's writing Black characters,
Right.
but she gets race questions. But the difference here is that you do very deliberately write about race, and you write about it from a really interesting perspective in this novel, as well as the first, which kind of the link between these two novels is that you're writing about mixed familial relationships, right?
Yep.
And so talk a little bit about that, and as well as kind of I think it gives you a lot of room to explore spaces that very few writers are able to explore, because all of a sudden you have these really deep relationships. So a relationship like Xavier and Sam, his father, who, while it has been a complicated relationship their whole life, he very much loves this man.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden he's seeing things in him that he had either repressed and kind of just ignored, but all of a sudden he can't ignore it anymore. And I think it gives you a really interesting place to write from, and a really interesting landscape to explore some conversations that very few people are having.
Thank you. I think to answer your question about why I think I go so deliberate with it and why I do it through the lens of mixed race families is because I think, to your point, one, I don't think there are a lot of stories coming at it from that angle, at least not in my experience. I certainly don't want to leave anybody out of the picture that I haven't read. But the other thing is, I think, a lot of times we know the reactions that we're supposed to have to things when people say awful shit, when they vote for that guy, when they do because it in a sort of common sense way, it makes sense that we would react that way, right? Like, no, I don't it would make every bit of sense. Nobody would blame Xavier if he just walked away from his father, right? It's like, he's saying some awful racist shit. He's my dad and I'm mixed, and he's still saying this shit. Like, fuck that guy. Like, excuse me, guys, I'm sorry.
No, absolutely, fuck that.
But how often is it really that simple, right?
No.
Like, it almost never, right? Here's Xavier's a character who I'm sure exists in real life, where he cares immensely about this guy, and then he comes to learn, and maybe always knew, but kind of maybe denied, but now it's in his face that this is the man he is, and he just can't shut it off, right? Like, he can't just say, I don't love this man anymore, or I can't care for this man anymore. And so I think that's why I go at these stories from this angle, because empathy is wrapped up in all of that. And to me, I think, as idealistic as it sounds, like, if there's any chance of us moving forward, we got to work on our empathy, and we got to work on really taking a look at what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes, as cliched as that sounds. But I try to create characters that people care about, so that when it comes to the stuff that they might be uncomfortable with, they'll still engage with it, because they are invested in the character. And if they're invested in the character, then they're invested in their outcome. And their outcome has very much to do with race and the dynamics that they live in because of race. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. There was I think people, it's human nature to paint things black and white. Like I remember I've talked about this before, but I remember reading a study about artists one time, and they were trying to get to all of these psychologists were basically trying to understand like how very creative people's brains work, and they had this suspicion and the kind of this hypothesis that it had to do with mental illness. And then what they wound up finding was that they didn't find that, but that they found that creative people had a much broader scale of ambiguity. They never looked at the world with black and white. Everything was gray. And the artist, and I think really good writers, that's the color they paint with, right? They paint the world gray. And that's what you do here is none of this is easy, and none of it is clear cut, and you're left with loving and hating people at the same time, and that's the way the world really works. What I love about it though is that your approach allows you to get to some conversations that are, one, very important conversations, but are also conversations that very few people are having in books. And so you've got these conversations between Xavier and his father, but then you have conversations like between Xavier and Schott, his cousin, and in particular, when Xavier comes and tells Schott what's just happened with his father, and basically his father didn't recognize him, calls him a racial slur, breaks Xavier's heart. He didn't really want to believe the nurses until kind of it happened to him. And in that moment, then he leaves and he goes and talks to Schott, but there's this conversation where Schott remembers something happening when he was a child. It doesn't necessarily even have to be about that particular piece of dialogue, that conversation, but talk about kind of the places that the train stops. You've got this action, but then the train stops at a station and the people engage and they talk. And to me, that's the most interesting part of this book, are these moments of conversation between characters, where they're engaging in some really tough subject matter, whether that's Xavier talking to nurses, whether that was Xavier talking to his father, whether that was Xavier talking to his cousin, all of these conversations that are getting around this issue.
So Schott was like my favorite character ever to write, because he's a truth teller, right? Like, I love people like that in my life, almost especially when they give you the hardship. You know what I mean? There's just that one person that is incapable of lying to you about not only like important things, but like about you yourself. Sometimes we can't see ourselves for ourselves, or sometimes we won't see ourselves for ourselves. So he was really fun to write in that instance. And I think he was also the foil to allow me to dive into those kind of conversations, right? Because Xavier had done a lot of avoiding, whether conscious or subconscious, to get just to get by, really. And Schott wasn't going to let him have that, no matter what condition he was in, no matter how sad he was about his father, no matter how upset he was. And I think we kind of all need something like that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
No, it does. I know for me, and your work tends to be the same way. Your work tends to be propulsive. It tends to be a really fast-paced narrative over a fairly short window of time with a lot of action crammed into it. And early on as a writer, that was pretty much the only thing that interested me, right? Like when I can remember the first time I ever read Daniel Woodrell's Tomato Red, and I read the opening chapter of that book over and over for a month, because I had read it, and I realized that he made me read like 15 pages without taking a breath. And it was like, how the hell did he do it?
Right.
And so as a younger writer, I think that's what I was interested in, was like, how fast can I make the train go? And then what's happened is that now I'm more interested in the places that the train stops.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe one of the big differences here, I think, between this and 3/5, your first novel, is that there are moments where this one stops and you take a moment to breathe and you're able to engage with some really impactful subject matter.
I'd say, I'm not blowing smoke here, but you're one of the people that I've learned that from. Another one's from a mutual friend, Wiley Cash. I remember the first time I read A Land More Kind Than Home. If I'd had a heart rate monitor on for some of the stuff that he had written in there, but what was amazing about what he had done with that was he'd take you up to that point where you felt like your heart was going to pound out of your chest, and then he'd drop it down and slowed it way down to go back into some more deeper character stuff before he took that ramp, before he took that roller coaster right back up the hill. So I think I did more of that in this one because that's what I like reading. You know what I mean? Like, I love the slow burn of character development, but I also like stuff to happen. You know what I mean? Like, it can't just be the slow burn for me. Some novelists pull it off really well, and I'll love it when they do it. But at the same time, I got it. Like, there has to be some forward momentum for me. So I really enjoy that, and I'm glad you just saw that in this. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what's it been like? I can remember when 3/5 came out. And a debut novel is always kind of this scary thing. It's one thing to write a book with no expectation that anybody will ever read it. It's another thing entirely when all of a sudden it's about to be out in the world. And when 3/5 came out, it came out to great reception, right? And everybody embraced it immediately. Edgar finalist, Anthony finalist. So what has that been like?
Man, it was wild. I was telling the women that running this before you came on that, like, it just, again, you didn't think I'm blowing smoke, but when I heard you were reading my book, let alone that you were one of the ones blurbing it, I was flipping out. The whole experience was amazing. I couldn't have asked for that kind of experience. But it was interesting, and like I'm glad you brought this up, because I talked to somebody else about this recently. It came with a little bit of pressure too on this next book. Not just the sophomore slump stuff though, but like as I was writing this one, and this is for our writers in the audience, like I ended up throwing out the first 20,000 words of this book because I thought I was supposed to write another crime novel, like, because I didn't know I had written a crime novel with 3/5. I could not be more grateful for the way that the community embraced it and lifted it up. But I was like, I just thought I wrote a book about some characters and there was a crime in it, but I didn't know that, like, I even going into when I went to like my MFA, like I didn't know anything about genre. I just knew books that I like to read, you know what I mean? But for this book, even though I had the Xavier character in mind and even the Shot character in mind, I started writing like this very just terrible crime book. Like, it was just bad. Yeah. Like I got to a point where like Ted Flanagan, who's another writer, and we're kind of like each other's beta readers. I finally just sent him a text and was like, I hate this book. Like, I can't do it. And he said, well, then he's like, write the book you want to write. And which is something I always told myself that I did, but I wasn't doing. Yeah. And the minute I did that, it was the absolute best experience. Like, there was no looking for motivation to get in the chair and write. Like, it was just day after day it was coming. Because I'd like kind of just let myself write what I was going to. I was hoping somebody was going to want to read it, but I knew I was going to want to, and that was what was important.
Yeah, man, there's that great, there's a really great interview with Harry Crews, and he talks about a lot of things over the course of this interview, but one is kind of how easy people think writing is, and that he would be at these parties and he talks about, meeting this brain surgeon. The brain surgeon basically telling him how he's going to write the next great American novel, and Harry Crews, finds this whole thing, comical, and he basically asked him, he's like, well, what would you do if I came in there and I said, hand me a scalpel? I'm about to perform an appendectomy. But one of the things he says in this interview is he says that there comes a moment a lot of times in writing a novel where you make a wrong turn, and there is no going back. Like there's no way to fix it, right? And so with you, it was 20,000 words. I've had it be 15,000 words. I've had it be 45,000 words. I've had it be an entire novel. I burned an 80,000 page or 80,000 word novel. But what he said was that the coward is going to be so scared of having to start over that they'll spend endless time trying to fix it and make it work. And then he says the writer throws it to the fire. And so it's wonderful to hear. I know that sucks that you burned 20,000 words, but it's wonderful to hear that you did, because I think it's a testament to you and the craft.
Thank you. What can I ask? After which book did you throw out 80,000? Was it after your first, after your second, when you threw out 80,000 words?
The first, Where All Light Tends to Go, I had about 15,000 words, and that novel I basically started writing. The main character, Jacob McNeely, he was very young. He was like 10 or 11.
Okay.
And I realized, and it was because the first scene I had, that's how old he was. Well, later on, I realized that was a flashback, and so I erased that. I want to say the next novel I got to be I was about twice that. I was about 30,000 words. Realized it was wrong, burned it. The third novel, The Line That Held Us, I wrote an entire novel and I turned it in, and my editor at the time told me it was bad, and at the time broke my heart. After about a month of sitting with it, I realized she's absolutely right.
Wow.
And I wind up completely burning the entire thing, scrapping the entire thing, and completely rewriting that novel. And I love that novel now.
That's great.
But yeah, talk about just kind of getting more comfortable with that process, because I and this is kind of too for any writers that might be in the audience. I think the greatest thing that a writer can do is to become incredibly comfortable with their own process. Like early on, you're trying to get that from other people, and it's like, well, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Do you sit at a computer, or do you do it and we so many people approach that as if it's equational, and it's if I figure out the variables, I can plug in A, B, C, D, and now I've got a novel.
Right.
And that's not at all how it works. So talk a little bit about kind of learning your own process and kind of where you're at now.
So it was so different from book to book. Because the first one was part of my MFA thesis, right? Or was my MFA thesis. And I know there's always discussions all over Twitter about whether you need an MFA or you don't need an MFA. You don't. I needed it because I had been gone for so long from writing. I graduated with my English degree, and then I didn't write another word for more than a decade. So, it wasn't until I felt that creative itch clawing at me to do something different that I realized I wanted to go back into that world, but I couldn't do it after 10 years of not knowing, I had forgotten everything about mechanics and craft. And I couldn't do it for me. So in that sense, the discipline that I got from having to have, 30 pages in every so many months to my mentor or things like that, that really started to get me into a routine. But but then I didn't use that routine at all for the second book. I'm not an ass and chair every day guy. I'm not a word count guy. I write by feel. It sounds might sound lazy, might sound, but I don't know. That's just my process. Ironically, when I threw out those 20,000 words, I was probably getting in 1,000 words a day. Like once I found the story that I was supposed to write. But it was because the feeling was I wanted to get in the chair every day. Like I couldn't wait to get to the next session. But I think anybody that tells you that you have to do anything when it comes to writing, I don't know. To me, that feels a little gatekeepy. You know what I mean? It's like, this is only for us. Yeah. And if you don't do these things, you don't get to do that. That's bullshit. Like there's so many storytellers out there that have stories to tell that might feel like they can't do it because they hear stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm here to tell you. I'm pretty sure you're here to tell them like that's not the case.
Yeah. I think for me, every book has been entirely different, and like you finish it, and so often it feels like that can be hard in its own self because you're completely relearning it.
Absolutely.
And so what do you got going now? Like what can we expect to see? Are you working on anything right now? Or?
I am. I might even have some news soonish, but not yet. It's go figure. It's exploring identity and family, but this time through a little bit of the lens of religion, some father-son stuff. Still very, character based, a little bit still propulsive, but it's my first stab at first person. Kind of playing with tenses a little bit too. So I'm getting with each book, I get a little bolder and just say, well, hopefully they'll come along for the ride, even if it's a little waggy. But yeah, I'm trying. And what about you? Like, I know I've seen you posting about stuff, but like, when's the next one?
Well, I got something I got an email today asking about like kind of what I would like to see with the cover and things. So I think we're getting.
Oh, nice.
I think next summer probably there'll be a book come out.
All right.
Yeah, the book's done. But man, so first person interests the hell out of me, and this is why. When I wrote Where All Light Tends to Go, the reason it's in first person is I woke up from a dream and he was talking, and it was very much a matter of keeping up. And I wrote that novel over the course of about a month and a half, and it was like stream of consciousness.
Oh wow!
And so the novel was written in first person for that reason. It's never happened again. And then when I finished this last novel, I woke up in the middle of the night, and Ashley was sitting beside me, watching Netflix or something. And I was like, give me a pen and paper. And she was like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I said, there's a woman talking. And this woman was talking in this dream, and it was the same thing. And she told me the opening line. She told me the whole opening scene. Like I could see all of these things unfold, and it was immediately first person because I could hear her.
Huh.
So with you, can you hear the voice, and whose voice is it? How old is this person? Tell us a little bit about this character.
It's funny that you say that. Yeah, like it's I can definitely hear him, but I don't know him enough yet. Like I'm actually I loved in Maurice Ruffin's first one how he never named the protagonist. I'm kind of playing with that right now because I don't feel like I know his name.
Yeah.
So, and all the other characters have names so far, and that's actually been a little bit of a fun challenge for myself to like not name him in dialogue and things like that. But he's my age. There's a little bit of auto fiction in this one. Not that there hasn't. I mean, we all bring pieces of ourselves to all these things, but This one might be even a little more so in that case. So it kind of sounds like me, sort of looks like me. As unoriginal and uncreative as that is.
Man, you just mentioned one of my favorites, which is Maurice Ruffin. But so tell me some of the stuff you're reading, because I know you gobble up books about as much as anybody I know. So what's some books you've read recently that you really enjoyed?
Believe it or not, I don't read as fast as I'd like. I don't gobble up that much, but I'm just finishing up Dashiell's collection.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. I've actually been reading a lot of short stories lately. I just finished, or not just finished, but a little while ago finished Chris Stuck's debut collection, Give Our Love to the Savages, or Give My Love to the Savages. That is an excellent collection. I just got an advanced, through Goodreads actually, advanced copy of Matt Johnson's new one, Invisible Things. So I can't wait to dive into that. So I got a few on deck right now. How about you? What are you reading?
Well, Secret Lives of Church Women, Dashiell, I love that novel. And obviously, read yours recently. I love Eli Craner's, debut.
That was great.
And watching the way that novel shifted. He sent me a copy of that novel a long time ago. And so getting to see it then versus see it now was really interesting to me. Gabino Iglesias's novel.
Oh yeah, can't forget Gabino.
Yeah, that'll come out. I think it comes out in August.
Yep.
Yeah, but man, that's a kill. That's a
kill. That book is wild.
Yeah. And trying to think. I've been reading a whole lot of nonfiction that's kind of outdoor writing, and that's that's something I do. I write a lot of essays. Yeah. But I've been trying to piece a book together eventually of essays, and so I read a pile of that stuff, turkey books, deer.
Well, you edited a collection of stories about fishing, right?
Yeah.
So was that fiction, or I forget if that was fiction?
No, it was nonfiction. The only thing that's questionable is Chris Offutt's essay, and it could be fiction, it could be nonfiction. But if it's fiction, then you'd have to call him a liar, and we don't want to call Chris Offutt a liar. which he's got a new novel out.
It just came out on Tuesday, right?
Yeah. So there's been a whole bunch of really great novels coming out recently. I don't know if we better open it up for questions.
Oh, okay, all right.
Hog all your time.
I had one more for you, but we'll give it to them. All right.
John, you can go ahead with your other question before we get to the.
Oh, I remember. I just wanted to ask him about, because he had asked me about what pressure, the idea of pressure came up, and I wanted to know, like 4 books deep now, do you still feel any of the similar things that you felt after the first one, after the third one? Like,
I don't feel any pressure, which I was never bad to. So every novel I've written aside from that first one has been sold on spec. It wasn't written at the time that they bought it. And that very first time, I paid very close attention to the deadline. I felt like you don't hit that deadline, somebody's going to come to the door looking for that money. I don't got the money because I've been spending it. It was there was pressure there. At this point, I just don't care.
Yeah.
And that's a really freeing place. Like this, I tend to be a writer who I think my natural schedule would be about 1.5 to 2 years per book. And this last one has taken me 5. And I'm probably, I want to say I was 2 years past deadline when I turned it in.
Okay.
And the only way I knew that was that once I turned it in, I went back and looked. But at the time, I didn't care, and I still don't care. Like, the art takes what the art takes, and they don't want a bad book.
Right.
So for me, I don't care. So I think the pressure changes. I think the hardest one is the sophomore novel, especially when you've had a novel that did really well, like your first one did. That the expectation. There's no way to avoid that.
Yeah.
And I think that as your audience grows and as the books get bigger and better, which I think your work is doing, I think, for the most part, I think a lot of those anxieties kind of go away, and you just get more comfortable in your own skin.
Nice. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's see if I got any questions.
Okay, so well, first I'd like to say thank you both. This has been a great conversation and I appreciate it. Also, I'm gonna say Dashiell Hammett's name one more time because everybody needs to read Secret Lives of Church Ladies. Just throwing that out there.
Like it's everything everybody says it is. Like,
it is, right? Yeah, like it's not just type, y'all. So just take it from us. Usually I will just say to people, everybody's tastes are different. But that's one of the books where I'm just like, I'm just going to put this in your hands, and thank you for all the other great recommendations. It's always great to have folks on who are just reading and can talk about, what's good to read. Like that's one of the great things about talking to authors is you're also readers. Good authors are also readers. That's a common tip that we've heard many, many times. Like if you want to write, you need to read. So John, we're going to start with a question for you from somebody you went to high school with, apparently.
Uh-oh. That's never good.
It's actually really good.
Oh,
okay. John Tennant shares the same last name with my personal favorite Doctor Who, blurred alert for y'all in the audience there. If you get that reference. Or not blurs if you're just a regular nerd. So
that was Doctor Who reference, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So Noah Tennant says.
Oh no!
Noah Tennant. Yeah.
I do remember that name.
Yeah. David Tennant's my favorite Doctor Who. So that was my little blurred reference. So John writes young people so well. I'm curious how or if his own high school or college experience informs his writing and voice. Admittedly, I'm especially curious because I sat behind him in math in high school, and I'm curious about how he might have channeled his high school experience into his work. Thank you, Noah. This was in a very lovely email. I'm going to go ahead and read the PS as well. PS, for those of you who wonder, John was always, in all caps, good people. Thank you, Noah.
Yeah, that's wow. Like you're gonna get, okay. I'm gonna
feel all the feels. We're here for it.
Yeah, wow. And I remember Noah very fondly. He was you can say a lot of people are nice, and then you can say some people are kind, and he was really kind. So that's, and as evidenced by that email. So thank you for what you said, Noah. That's amazing. I think because even at 46, I still feel like a kid. And so I still feel connected to some of the things that I enjoyed when I was a kid, but also still feel connected to some of the things that weren't so great when I was a kid. I can recall with a lot of clarity some of the things that it was like growing up mixed race, like the pluses and the minuses. So I think that's why it's great to hear somebody say that I'm able to do that well. So I will say the reason I think I can do that well is because I still feel connected to that even, decades later. I think that's why it's easy for me to channel that into my books. I hope that's a good answer. That's the one that comes to mind.
I think that's a great answer. And I'll just say, even though people aren't here to listen to me, reading your work, because I'm also mixed race. And one of the things about the way you write, people really at any age, but I'll chime in with Noah there, young people in particular, is so what I found happening as I was reading, because some of it's actually quite hard to read. And I'm going to go out and say harder to read for those of us who had those experiences, right? So it was the simultaneous kind of amen and cringe happening in my brain, right?
Yep.
So like all at the same time, like I'm so with you. And I really like, my skin is crawling, right? Because of, being able to just sort of viscerally kind of recreate some of those things for any reader, certainly.
Right.
But certainly to conjure up for readers who might have had similar experiences. So
Thank you.
I second that emotion from Noah. Thank you, Noah,
Thank
for
you
the
very
good
much.
question. Yeah. And so I want to ask, we just have a few minutes left. And so I just want to ask a sort of broader question of both of you. And David, you'll have to forgive me because I feel like this is, you've sort of fielded a similar question before, but I always like the way you address it. So hopefully it won't bother you too much to dig back into this territory. Because you've both talked so well tonight about speaking, in this case specifically, talking directly at race, right? Which isn't necessary to do, but you've chosen to do it and have done it well. And so from both of you, because David, you're writing about social issues in your novel as well, right? In your novels as well. Can you talk about what you see, maybe not as the role of novelists or the novel, but as your roles as writers in that regard, in terms of what you put out in the world and what you're trying to say, perhaps a little bit beyond just providing also just an excellent reading experience for people.
Yeah, well, I'll say first, I don't think that any writer carries any sort of obligation to write about anything. And I think that particularly comes problematic with writers of color, because the very first question that's always asked of a person of color is, what were you trying to say about race? And maybe they were. One of my favorite short story writers, Rian Amilcar Scott, very deliberately writing about race, and he's doing it in a whole lot of times these absurdist, fantastical ways. But asking that question of him makes sense. Because he's approaching it head on. Asking that question of John, I think, makes sense because, again, he's approaching it head on. But where it becomes particularly problematic is when that question gets asked of a writer. I think, and I'll mention her again, Lisa Cross Smith, who's had a novel that just came out that's gorgeous. And a lot of times, I don't think that's, I don't want to speak for her, but I don't think that's necessarily Lisa's goal. I don't necessarily a lot of times feel like that's exactly what, that she's trying to tackle it head on. She tells stories with Black characters that may not have, directly tackle race. And yet she still gets asked those questions. So for me, I feel an obligation when I feel, most often it comes out of a place of unbearable silence. So with the opioid crisis, it was that, with When These Mountains Burn, I wrote about that because it was inignorable. It was in my backyard. I was driving through town and watching them pull bodies out of bathrooms on a weekly basis, and nobody was talking about it as far as right here, Western North Carolina. This novel I just finished is about race. And again, it's because, nobody's talking about race, especially in Appalachia. We've got a really rich tradition of some great writers like Crystal Wilkinson, Frank X. Walker, all of these Black Appalachian writers. But for the most part, when we think about Appalachia, it's painted very broadly. It's just whitewashed. And in Jackson County, the oldest church in Jackson County is a Black AME church. And so for me, I felt obligated to try to capture pieces of that. And with this new novel, it was also that white people weren't having conversations about race in fiction. The burden was being placed squarely on the shoulders of number one, non-white writers, but also on the same characters in the fiction. And the truth is that the people who need to be having these conversations the most are white people, and it's white men particularly. And so, for me, it was very much a matter of trying to approach a place of silence and make it loud. And so I think I do feel that obligation in a lot of ways, but I don't think that it's a necessity of art, and I don't think that it's a necessity of the artist. I think they can. John obviously does, and John does it exceptionally well. And I think the thing that interests me most about him as a writer is the angle, because it's an angle that like he said earlier, I don't know anybody. I don't want to say nobody else is doing it, because sure, there are people I haven't read, but I don't know of anybody else who's doing what John's doing. And so for me, I'm thankful that he's writing the things that he's writing. But
thank you.
But yeah, I guess I answer that same question for you.
I mean, I don't know if I can answer it much better than that, but you when you said conversations, that's the thing that I feel. If I feel an obligation, it's towards that. I want to write things that generate conversation, because I think that's the one thing that we need the most that we're not doing, is having conversations. And it's not even just about the silence, because when we break the silence, we're usually just either yelling at each other or talking over each other or talking at each other. Like there have been experiences in my life where to me, the biggest breakthroughs that I've had with people in terms of understanding have been through conversations, sometimes long, drawn out, painful conversations, but coming from a place of at least enough mutual respect to hear each other. And sometimes, to me, a way to get to that place is by reading in what feels like is not a conversation. It feels like I'm just, engaging with this book, but by engaging with that book, they're starting to have a conversation almost with themselves, because here's a character that's nothing like them, but yet they're identifying with, they're pulling for, they're seeing some of themselves in, because they have some of the same flaws, they have some of the same struggles. Again, I know that might sound grandiose or idealistic, but like that's kind of what I think of when I approach these books, knowing that I'm going to talk about these topics.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely. I think the greatest, one of the greatest powers that a book has is that it's a safe place to engage with difficult ideas.
Absolutely.
Because if you're sitting across a table and a conversation comes up and someone says something that makes you uncomfortable, the reaction so often to being made uncomfortable is anger immediately. It's a defensiveness. And really, you might not even be angry, but it's just a defensiveness because you've been made uncomfortable. And fiction, holding a book is so intimate, and so you're with nobody but yourself. And so it's a safe place to engage with these ideas that do make you uncomfortable. This book will make you uncomfortable. It made me uncomfortable. And I think, like Stephanie said, it made her more uncomfortable than it could possibly make me. And that's the great thing about fiction, that's George Saunders said, when it's done well, it has the capacity to serve as empathy's training wheels. And I think that's as good a way as you could put it.
Yeah.
Thank you both. I so appreciate how thoughtful you've both been throughout this hour, but there as well. Thank you for indulging that question. Again, no author is under any obligation, particularly not authors of color, but I appreciate you both tackling that question. And David, what you said earlier and just now reminds me of Toni Morrison and the what I believe is a fairly famous interview that she gave with Charlie Rose back in the day, where she was kind of dealing with some of this stuff that's put on Black authors, and particularly Black authors who, in her case, is one of maybe 2 Black authors that most people could name at the time, right? To be honest, right? Where she was like, white people have a serious problem to work out, right? And I would like to sit back and have them work that out, as opposed to, looking at where we are with, racism and feeling like, this is extrapolating from what she said, but then, but the next step is like that, where does the work really need to fall? And so, yeah, you spoke very well to that in terms of that gap around those conversations and being willing to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Stepping back and saying, now who has been uncomfortable this whole time?
Yeah.
And who's, been able to get away with not being uncomfortable much of the time? And can we even that out a little bit? And maybe that's how we can make some real progress. So so thank you both for the work you do for this lovely event. Thanks everyone who's been with us this evening. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day. We know that y'all have stuff to do. So we appreciate you very much. And before I'll say goodnight to everyone, I'll just like to always give one last opportunity for last words from our guests. So the last word will be to John. So we'll start with David, if you have any final thoughts.
I don't know that I have any final thoughts other than go buy that book.
Right on.
And if you haven't read 3/5, go back and get 3/5.
Yeah.
A very different novel, but tackling a lot of the same difficult subject matter, and it's an equally beautiful novel.
Absolutely, John.
Mine is mostly just thanks first to David for doing this, because I started as a fan, I'm still a fan, and now I get to talk to him like this. So this is pretty amazing. So, and it was a fantastic conversation. So thank you for that. Thank you to Malaprops and booksellers, bookstagrammers, reviewers. I made a point of calling this out in the acknowledgements too. Like, we don't get to do what we do without your guys' support. You're hand selling books, you're spreading the word. So a big thank you to everybody for that. And anybody, as Stephanie said, anybody that showed up tonight and took time out of your busy schedule, I appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing the folks who are with us sometime again for another event. And John and David, we're looking forward to what y'all have coming out next. And until next time, everyone, please stay safe and well. And thank you again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.